So, what's the real difference between a country that's free and one that just looks free on the surface? Today, we're going to get into the nuts and bolts of what separates a democracy from an authoritarian government. And trust me, understanding this isn't just for a textbook. It's pretty much essential for making sense of anything you see in the news today. Right, so how can you actually tell? A lot of countries have all the stuff that looks democratic. They hold elections, they have parliaments, the whole setup. But does that automatically make them free? That's the big puzzle we're going to try and solve together. Okay, to figure that out, we've got to start at the beginning. We need to clearly define the two extremes, the two poles of the spectrum of power. Let's get some clear, simple definitions for what these systems really are. So on one end of the spectrum, you've got the authoritarian state. And the key thing to get here is that power is held by a very small group. But even more importantly, they don't have to answer to the public. There's just no real way for the people to hold them accountable for their actions. And then, on the complete other end, you have a liberal democracy. And listen, this is way more than just voting every few years. It's a whole package deal of protections and institutions. We're talking about guaranteed freedoms, a justice system that isn't controlled by politicians, and a society where people can actually organize and speak out. These are the pillars that make sure the government answers to the people.
All right, so we have our definitions, but how do we use them to see what's what in the real world? Well, let's break it down into 5 key indicators. Think of these as a practical checklist for telling the difference. First up, and this one is absolutely fundamental, the rule of law. In a real democracy, the law is king. It applies to everyone from you and me all the way up to the person in the highest office. But in an authoritarian system, oftentimes the rulers are the law. They can pretty much do what they want when they want. Second, you gotta look at the media. Is it a watchdog or is it a lapdog? Democracies, for the most part, protect a free press that can and does criticize the government. Authoritarian regimes, though, they either heavily lean on the media or just control it outright to push their own story. The classic example, of course, is the Chinese Communist Party's Great Firewall, which completely censors the internet to block any criticism. Indicator number 3, elections. And just seeing a ballot box isn't nearly enough. The real question is this: can the people in power actually lose? In a lot of authoritarian countries, elections are just political theater. They're designed to make things look legitimate, but the outcome is decided long before anyone casts a vote. Fourth on our list is transparency. Basically, can you see what your government is actually doing? In democracies, the decision-making process is largely out in the open. But in authoritarian systems, everything important happens behind closed doors. This secrecy is a huge reason why a country like China gets such a low score on civil liberties. The government can operate with zero public oversight. Okay, so we know what these two extremes look like. But here's the thing. Countries aren't just static. They're not stuck in one box forever. They can actually move along this spectrum. So what does that journey from authoritarianism toward democracy actually look like? Well, this whole process has a name, democratization. And it's not a single event. It's not like flipping a switch. It's a transition, and usually a really long and messy one, where a country starts to shift away from authoritarian rule and tries to build a more democratic system. The goals of this process are actually pretty clear, and you can see how they build on each other. It all starts with making elections actually mean something, making them more fair and competitive. When that happens, people start to participate more. And that, in turn, creates demand for better protection of everyone's rights, which finally leads to establishing the rule of law for everybody. And look, this isn't just theory. We can see it happening in the real world. Just take a look at Nigeria. The data shows that between 2006 and 2021, its score for protecting civil liberties was on a pretty steady upward climb. Now, that is a concrete sign of a country moving down that path of democratization, even if there are bumps along the road. But, and this is a really big but, that path is almost never a straight line. Progress can slow down, it can stop, and it can even go into reverse. So let's talk about the common roadblocks that can get in the way of democratic reform. This quote here points to a really, really clever tactic. Authoritarian regimes can take the very institutions of democracy, like an election commission, and use them to just rubber stamp their own power. It creates something that looks democratic from a distance, but when you get up close, you see it's just a hollow front. It's all for show. And here are some of the biggest things that can slam the brakes on progress. You've got corruption, which just rots the whole system from the inside. If the courts are controlled by the rulers, you can forget about the rule of law.
Sometimes they just write the election rules to make it impossible for the opposition to win. And often, you see them start to roll back protections for things like free speech or free press. Any one of these can stop democratization dead in its tracks. So, we've covered the what and the how. But let's wrap this up with maybe the most important question of all. Why does any of this really matter? At the end of the day, it all comes down to one of the most crucial ideas for any government: stability.
And the absolute bedrock of stability is this thing called political legitimacy. It's just the belief among the people that their government actually has the right to rule them. This isn't about power through force, it's about acceptance. When a government is seen as legitimate, it can govern well because people follow the laws not just because they're afraid of being punished, but because they feel the government's authority is justified. And that brings us to our final and, I think, most critical question. If real, lasting stability is built on legitimacy, on people actually accepting their government, then can a regime that operates in secret, that crushes freedom, and that answers to nobody, can it ever really be stable in the long run? It's a tough question and definitely something to think about. Thanks for tuning in.